This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Bangwa Chestnut and normally Sylvester Merrill, but we will return to the regularly scheduled program at some point. So for today's episode, we have a lot to unpack in no time. That's just the way it is. Well, if we get off to start first, Lehigh's adding a women's wrestling program, and to buckle off of that are the Cowboys, the Okie State Cowboys, far off from adding a program. And we'll unpack that. Then we talk the no Jordan Burroughs in Final X. Where does it leave Burroughs? Recently was a special guest coach at Cowboy RTC. So is there something there we're missing? And then we'll break down that Final X lineup for men's and women's. What do we think? How do we think it's going to go? But nonetheless, this is this week's weigh-in, and let's get right into it. So if we get right in and just cut the cheese, Lehigh adds a Division I women's wrestling program. So, now we're starting to see what we knew we would. After the Iowa Hawkeyes got a program rolling, we knew we were going to start to see a couple more come up. And I think that chain is about to start moving, because now if Lehigh is going to get a team, now the only big difference here is going to be when are the Cowboys coming, like I said. So I depict 1, maybe 2 years. Give it 1, maybe 2 years, and maybe the Cowboys might start a team, because there's been a lot of hesitant, but with this Lehigh, the difference is they already have it as a club over there. So it's already a club. They've already been competing as a club. That's the interesting fact here. They've already been competing as a club, so it tells you they already have the culture there. It's just they need to add it as an official sport. And I think it's closer than we think. That's why I depict 2-3 years here, because it's possible. It's possible. It really well is possible to have a 2-3 year cowgirl wrestling come to Stillwater. I think it's very possible. I really do. And that would bring a very huge motion to that, because first of all, when Iowa did it, it shook the community. You had probably the same team that was winning. I don't know. We weren't keeping up with that. But you probably had the same team that was winning every year. And unfortunately, that's not the – well, now it's the case because Iowa has taken over. But for how long? Because you have to understand, Iowa's toughest wrestlers. You look at it in the college sense. You got 4 years of eligibility. Iowa's toughest wrestlers are great, but what do you really have after that? So that's where I think, you're seeing a lot of these top level women's recruits. They're not all snook in Iowa. So it's looking like, I think it should be very well something in the hands and cards of in the coming years. Will Iowa still be on top, winning national team trophy? Give it 3-4 years, maybe less than that. Probably not. Now, do I think that it'll always be like that? No, I think Iowa's gonna, come be back and forth, going up the top, left and right. But I do think it's real interesting, for many of reasons, being because it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, Iowa's got a strong team now. Iowa's got a strong team now. We know that. That we know. Can they keep the success come 3-4 years? Well, maybe not. We don't know. But what I do know is when you start to get other programs involved like that, what's going to be real interesting is when Penn State finally decides to get a Division I women's, because that'll be really good. That'll be nice. That'll be nice because, as much as many may say, why do you even care? Well, because it's double wrestling. You don't understand. You get a good NCAA tournament for the men's, and then you get a good women's. Like, here on the way, and we drafted for the women's. So it's really good. It's worth it. It's good. And when you see more teams, you're going to see, the possibility of more. Right now there's only so many regionals, only so many go, but you know how it is when the Big Ten gets all these women wrestling programs. The Big Ten dominates, and the Big 12. I think in the future, are we going to see more regionals? Are we going to see those brackets opened up a little more? I hope so, because it needs to be plentiful here. It needs to be very plentiful when we talk in terms of this, because to be honest, we're near a lot of good things coming when it comes to that sport, because the NCAA had approved D2 D3, so now you got D2 D3, and then you got championships more than likely coming. This may be the last year or coming years of this National Women's Championship that is non-NCAA, because once the NCAA rolls it, hey, not saying that the organization before didn't do a good job, but there's gonna be some scrapping. There's gonna be some scrapping, because with the men's, you all know, no seed is safe from an upset. I'm sure there have been upsets along the years where some have said, "Wow," and I think that's the case here. It's just really, we talked about this last episode. Episode 50. That was our big boy, our big boy, big girl. Episode, that it was the biggest episode ever. You know, I feel like, it has not been, I don't feel it was the biggest ever episode on this channel, but, to get to 50 was a good thing. And we talked about this, the mental performance and all of that, that the aspect here is like we talked about on that episode, is about, it doesn't matter in terms of who and what your opponent is. It doesn't matter. You have to get to what you have to do. And when we went in about a lot of that, it translates to men's and women's wrestling. You've got to. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's the takedowns you have to get, and you can't look at somebody and say, well, they're fourth in the country, they're fifth in the country. It doesn't matter what they're ranked in the country, because at the end of the day, anybody can be beat. Anybody can be beat. We all see it. Some of New Jersey's 4-time undefeated state champs head to college, they get beat. And only have, they never lose in high school, but they get beat in college. Everybody can be beat, and that's what we talked about on that episode, was about how the mentality of you, hey, I can be beat. And I went into about how the understanding of that. So that just saying that, how that translates to men's and women's, and it wasn't, I can be beat. It was, it was more or less, hey, they have the ability to take me down and turn me 6 times, but I won't let it happen. Why? Because I now know, I don't believe I'm untouchable. I believe they can do something, so I have to stay sharp. And that was the whole talk, was about, staying sharp. No, don't underestimate anybody. Just because you say you beat your opponent last year doesn't mean you can beat them this year. And I think that translates. And that's a lot of what happens at NCAAs. And I say this because somebody, like, this happens to a lot of Penn State, few of them. You beat a guy all year you beat him. Comes to natties, you lose to him in the finals, and you're like, how? They got better. So that was one thing to kind of to shift for and break down. Also, Jordan Burroughs ran practice at Cowboy RTC. So let's speculate this. And I say speculate because it's going to be speculation. And I'm gonna say this for one or two reasons, because there's no true fact here. Think about this. Jordan Burroughs over there running practice. Is it possible that Jordan Burroughs might be wanting to be in that Cowboy program? Think about it. But you gotta really think about it. We're sitting here saying to ourselves, he wouldn't be a head coach. That's David Taylor. But would he? Because if they get cowgirl wrestling and you let Jordan Burroughs take over that program, now we got a good looking cowboy wrestling program altogether. So, the sights of having Jordan Burroughs in a room like that is very interesting. It is very interesting because now that tells you Jordan Burroughs, and this is Jordan's year of not making, of not being in a Final X or anything like that. This is that year that he's not in it. Everybody thought he was gonna compete up at everybody thought, that he was still gonna make moves forward, but it actually did not happen. And that was one thing that that was very interesting, that everybody was very interested about, is no Burrows. So it's the first year. You never see this. Like, you never really see a no Jordan Burroughs. This isn't something that you really ever see. You know, you don't really see you don't really see this that often. So it's fairly interesting that now all of a sudden we're seeing, well, team. Now we're all of a sudden seeing no Burrows, and this is it's an interesting something, and I say that because it's not often that you see something like this of this magnitude happen. Jordan Burroughs to not be there is like fairly interesting. Fairly interesting, to see something like this go on, and that is just absolutely interesting. I would have never thought it would come to this, but like many have said on social media, I would agree with what they were saying. I hope Burroughs gives it a proper taking the shoes off moment. That is what you do in wrestling. So that is one thing that I say I hope Jordan does, but there's no way to know if he will or he will not. But I do say Burrow's coming up to, out of all the RTCs you could be running practice at. It tells us that it possibly gives a speculation that cowgirl wrestling may be a lot closer than we think. If it in terms is going to be there in terms of like Jordan Burroughs, in terms of Burroughs, is Burroughs going to be the guy? And it could be possible. I'm not going to say if it is or isn't. I'm not going to say if it is or isn't because I know it's pretty close. It is very close. So I don't want to say if it is or isn't because we know it's close. So that's one thing we know that could possibly be. super close is this Jordan Burroughs demeanor. The demeanor of Jordan Burroughs and what maybe what's to come. I think that's going to be something very interesting because at this point we all know Burroughs is the guy. We all know Burroughs is the guy, and that's something that we've known for a long time. And to now find that Jordan's not going to be in a world team or anything like that, that's just super interesting that anything like that would happen. So it's just in a demeanor in a way that it's like, okay, what does this mean for Jordan, and what does this mean for a lot of that stuff, and that's just one thing that I could think off the top of my head is, okay, what if Burroughs is possibly thinking that? So that was one thing that we were able to, because we know he runs the club. We all know that. We all know Jordan Burroughs runs his club. We all know that. So he runs the club. But the question here is if Jordan is going to make a coaching move at the Division 1 level. It could be for a team. It really could. But the likelihood of something like that happening is just really, really slim. And I say that because, of how how crazy the coaching world is. We're like, you're seeing head coaches turn to assistants and stuff like that. So I definitely think, in terms of just in terms of wrestling, I definitely think it's going to be interesting. I definitely think we're at a time right now where this may be interesting in terms of what kind of Burroughs we get, because Burroughs is a great wrestler, and to see Burroughs finally turn around and say, "Hey, I'm not going to do this no more. I'm not going to do this," and he hasn't officially said that at all. It's just one of those things where it's like, all right, no Burroughs. This is interesting. This is fairly interesting. So I think it's something of the magnitude that, like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, that's mad interesting to have had happen, to see no Burrows. And that's just something that, is very, very interesting to grasp, no Burrows. It's just, that's one, that's one that you can't really put your mind on. So if we jump on over to this Final X. So let's get it off. We'll start off with the women's. Um, you know, let's get it off right away. At 53 kilo, we're gonna start 53. Well, we'll go 50. 50. I got Aubrey. I got Aubrey Jimmy's winning that at 50 kilo. 53. I got Felicia Taylor winning that. At 55, I could be wrong here. I've got Ledecker. I got Ledecker. At 57, Helen Maroulis is definitely going to win that. That's nothing different. At 59, I think it could be Abinetti. At 62, we all know Kayla Miracle should win that. At 65, I'm going Macy Kilty. 68, Kennedy Blades definitely should win that. And this 72, Amit Alora, I think she should win that. And then at 76, I definitely think Kylie Walker is going to win that. That's just a quick rundown of how I feel on the women's side. When we get to the men's, at 57, I'm going to say Spencer Lee, but I think there's a chance. Now, Jax Forrest up against Vito Arujau, I don't think there's a chance there. Actually, scratch that. I do think there's a chance. I think in all these men's matchups, even on the women's side, I think there's few of them that, where you say they're in, but there's a lot of chances here. If it's anybody I think is going to run right through anything, run right through their guys, it might possibly be Spencer. Vito's one of them. Diaka Mahalis is another. But some of these ones I think are going to be good. That 74, Mitchell Messenbrink and David Carr should be really good. That Evan Wick and Levi Haynes should be really good. And I don't know who else is excited for this, but this is a Heat Valencia and Kyle Dake. I'm excited for that because the Heat has already proven he can beat Dake, but now can Dake avenge the Heat? 3 matches, that's going to look good. Joseph McKenna and Real Woods, that's a good one. I can't call that, but I'd stick with my I stick with the Jersey boy, Joey McKenna. I think, can Jax Forrest put up a good fight against Vito Arujau? Oh yeah. What's going to be the difference is you understand Vito is very, very quick and slick when it comes to when you get shots on Vito. So the first thing is he's got to understand you may not get the first shot, you may not get the second, but third, fourth, you got to keep going. You'll get something. And then we got the American boy, Wyatt Henderson at 125 kilo against Trent Hilger. I got Wyatt all day. He's got that winning culture. He's got that luck this year. I got Wyatt. And Josh Barr and Trent Hidley, or Trent, just so I don't keep, butchering the last name, Trent. I got Trent. I think Trent should be able to win that. Now, in terms of 97, Snyder and Zilmerman. Listen, Snyder was the golden boy, the poster boy, and now we see the poster boy is not so golden. I think in terms of wrestling, Snyder's a great guy, but I think there's a time when you say, okay, we need to see you lose right now. We don't need to see you win. We don't need to see, because there's going to be a lot of back and forth hatred because of the fact that instead of apologizing on social media to your wife or anything, you chose to say, hey, God is great and I will never go against anything like that. But you chose to not address the issue. So with that being said, I great wrestler, great stuff, but I got to go against Snyder this time around, and only this time around because when you're the poster boy, you got to keep yourself clean, and I don't mean like in terms of like in any other terms. I mean like you're the poster boy, we're little boys and possibly anybody else, little wrestlers, recreation wrestlers, high school, they're looking up to you. That was, it was what we thought in NCAA wrestling, the poster boy. Well, no, at first he was the poster boy of heavyweights. Then Gable came along. Gable was that poster boy. And now we have Wyatt Henderson, who's that poster boy. Snyder has always been the United World Wrestling guy where you say, wow, he got his first world title at 18. Now you're not acting so much like a poster boy. So I think this is a time when you say, hey, let Snyder lose. Let it all die down. A couple years, let Snyder come back. But it's just going to make it hard to be the poster boy when you do such things things like Snyder has, and I won't get into what those things are. You can Google Snyder. That's for you to find out. Not for me, not for me to tell um on the pod. But that is, that is our extensive, breakdown of everything, in terms of topics. I do think that all of this is going to play a nice role. Because let's all remember we saw David Taylor run a club too. He ran the M2 Training Center, which was nice place. I mean, nice place. Then he expanded to when Jeff Butnex took his Rutgers job. He expanded to New Jersey, and it was in the old Butnex Training Center. And then he had Coop trained over there. That's what the Coop used to call it. Coop trained over there, running the show along with David. And Coop trained is came from Apex. He was given the opportunity to run that Apex Mawai Coop trained. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was all great things. And then you left Apex Mawa, for for uh for this M2 Training Center job. And I get it. You're going to Jeff's facility. He's already got mats, but Coop kind of left his mats with Apex. So like you got a mat that now says on the floor, Coop trained. What are you gonna do with that? Coop was supposed to, take his mats. All due credit to where credit's due. Come on, take your mats. Take your mats and say, hey, Apex, find another set to put down there. You got a Coop train. But he ran a good thing with Coop trained. He ran a good thing with Coop trained. And you know what? It goes to say the same reason why, you know, we saw Army head coach give up his position for an assistant coaching role. I think that goes to say some guys are telling us head coaching is not easy, and I'm not, in no way, shape, or form speaking from experience. I'm just saying, I think they're trying to tell us there's a lot of work and effort into being a head coach. And I think even at a club level, you still have a lot you have to do, social media wise and a lot of things wise. So I think that's really an interesting one to get at in terms of like Coop. But do I think that this is, the end of Coop? Probably not. Probably not, because now look at it. David Taylor doesn't run nothing. You're a college coach now, so I don't even think the M2 training center still runs. That would be, you know, you turned into a college coach, so it kind of, you know, but that would be something that's for sure interesting. Yeah, it still does. So David Taylor's M2 training center still runs. Nice. Nice. Same way Jeff Butnex kept his facility is the same way David Taylor kept his. So that's a real interesting one. Definitely a real interesting one. I mean, it's no different. But you talk about, Jordan Burroughs now runs a gig. Is he down near David Taylor path? Yeah. It'll be interesting if he takes a, what I think will be real interesting is you saw Jordan Burroughs take a high school job, which I don't think is ever possible to be it could be, but it's going to be some kind of crew, man. It's going to be some kind of crew. But nonetheless, that is this week's weigh-in. As we draw to an end, that was this week's weigh-in, which is so much to unpack. Luckily, we were able to get through all of it, and I think that is just some things that are real interesting in terms of just everything. So, in terms of all the topics we discussed, uh, I definitely think women's wrestling it's growing. If many may say it doesn't look like it is, you're going to see a lot more Division One programs pop up. You're going to see it pop up, but what I think some of these schools are doing is starting it as a club, trying to get some girls on the team, and then add the sport and be like, well, now we already have this, we already have gear, we already have, it's possible, but I do think you're going to see a lot more programs pop up, and I think it's going to get real interesting as we continue to follow that closely. And when they get their championship, again, as you guys know, we will be drafting every year, men's, women's. We'll be drafting every year. I was fortunate enough to be able to sweep both championships. Women's was a blowout win, and men's was fairly close. It was fairly close. The difference is the difference between what happened was just all Americans. You gotta understand who's gonna. Just because somebody lost doesn't mean they're done making points to you. It's about how you think they're doing. They wrestle back, and that's how I always draft. Is okay. If this person loses, do I think they're all American? Yeah. So there was a lot of that going on. So with that being said, like, comment, subscribe, share to your friends. We are the Weigh-In Podcast, growing weigh-in. Always coming out with new episodes that Tuesday, Thursday. Always. I'm keeping up my streak from my New Year resolution. Still doing it, and I will always still be doing it. And regardless, you guys will get an epi, and I will get the fun of recording. So with that being said, this is The Weigh-In by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but that we will return to our regularly scheduled program at some point. And this is The Weigh-In. Weigh-In out.
The Weigh-In, where stories ignite.